I'm delighted that we're joined by the fantastic Terry, who's going to give us an overview with regards to what is actually meant by artisanal and small-scale mining. So Terry, just to start with, would you like to introduce yourself? So who are you?
So I'm Terry Garde. I am a retired, if that's the right word, mining engineer, having studied at Wits University in South Africa and spent my entire adult life working in the mining industry of Zimbabwe. And then I got a couple of interesting jobs elsewhere. For example, I worked in Afghanistan, in Kabul, for the Ministry of Mining and Petroleum. And then I've done some consultancy work here and there around the world. I've taught at the University of Zimbabwe in mining engineering. And here I am in England, still deeply involved, and this time with artisanal and small-scale mining.
Amazing. So just a little bit of expertise with regards to that and experience. So as we mentioned, many people know that there is this thing called artisanal and small-scale mining, but what do we actually mean by ASM?
So it's a scale of mining, and so scales of mining have been oversimplified into large and artisanal and small scale, which is simply not correct at all. There's very large scale mining, usually multinational corporations, often based here in London for their head office. And then we have kind of national large scale mines, which are in a country, for example, a coal mine, maybe a large-scale mine within a country, not a multinational at all. And then we have medium-scale mining, and that really is where most business style of mining, you find that in medium-scale mining, where people have raised capital, they've set up some shares, they've got shareholders, and they've started to mine a mineral at a medium scale, which is, again, very low. It's very national. It's within a national boundary. And then finally we get small and scale, which is ordinary people who are mining, but they've got money and they've got capital. And then the very tail end of all of this is micro scale mining, which is what artisanal mining really is. It's mining at a micro scale.
And with regards to this micro-scale mining, is this prolific across the world? Do people, there are many people that do it, and if so, which kind of countries, which nations tend to do it more?
So it is a global phenomenon now, and it is found in all of the major continents, kind of around the equator. So you'll find artisanal and small-scale mining in places like Brazil, Garde. You'll find it throughout Africa, as far up as the Sahel and as far down as South Africa, Johannesburg, and then across through to the Philippines and that part of Asia. And so it really is a global phenomenon, and it tends to be in countries that would be regarded as developing countries or the global south.
Okay, and what sort of commodities are they generally mining for, and why?
The commodities are a completely wide range of different commodities, going from precious stones and jewelry, which the majority of the world's precious stones are mined by ASM. And then it accounts for about 20% of the world's gold that's mined every year is mined by ASM miners. It's really blossoming now with cobalt in the Congo and with lithium, particularly in places like Zimbabwe, where lithium is suddenly being mined by ASM on a much wider scale than was imagined before. And so those are the big ones. Then people who live near towns and cities are often doing gravel mining. They're mining blocks for building, and they can mine coal and sell coal locally. So it can come down to all sorts of different minerals, but the ones that capture people's imagination right now are the 3 T's, tin, tantalum, and can't remember the tungsten, that's it, thank you, and now lithium, cobalt, gold, precious stones. Those are the ones that are getting the international media attention.
So I can imagine for something like, say, the precious gems, that's almost quite easy from you dig it out the ground, and then that's a very tangible thing to be able to sell. With regards to, say, gold or maybe even lithium, in what form do the artisanal miners tend to get that to before they sell it, or what happens after they've dug it out of the ground?
So you're right. The first thing is that whatever minerals they're mining must be easily accessible, and it must be easily processed. And so if the processing is as simple as bagging it, then that's what they will do, and then shift the bag down the value-added chain to somebody else. And that's true, for example, of coal and lithium right now. But for other minerals, it's what they can do easily with minimum technology, rudimentary technology, and minimum chemicals and costs. So it really is what can we do with virtually no money, and that's as far as it will go. And so with gold, they'll just get it out of the ground, they'll amalgam it, and they will then sell the gold bead immediately on site to the local gold dealer, and that's as far as it will go for gold.
Okay, and so with regards to that, are we looking at a lot of individuals working separately, or do they tend to come together in consortiums, etc.? How does all of that work?
Invariably, it starts with an individual who discovers a deposit in their backyard or in the local neighborhood, and then often that news then leaks out, and before a moment has passed, you would have had a gold rush or something like that. And then it becomes collectives soon after that. These collectives are just a very loose amalgam of people doing stuff together. It could be a family, it could be a bunch of individuals, but it's very seldom that those collectives are legally registered as cooperatives or another form of enterprise. It's mostly ad hoc, and it's just what suits the people at the time.
So you mentioned that word legal, and I guess this is something that, especially from perhaps the end consumer of a lot of these materials, perhaps where people get a bit worried, and there's that constant discussion and debate around, okay, if you're sourcing your cobalt from, say, a large organization or a smaller organization, what is better with regards to that? What are your thoughts in terms of, I guess, that transparency and the way in which artisanal miners work together, etc.?
It's a transition, and so it always starts illegally. It always starts with somebody finding something and starting to mine it. And then over time, depending on what is needed and how deep you have to go, how much water you have to pump, and so on, it becomes increasingly static. And then with static situations, it becomes more likely that they will become firstly informal, then formal, and finally legal. And all of that depends on what the people really want themselves. They are not dictated to by governments or by international ethical organizations such as Fair Trade. It will evolve as it suits them.
And so in terms of what's actually driving them to do this in the first place, do they regard themselves as a professional miner, or is it something that they're doing on the side, or does it very much depend on the context in which they're working?
It all starts with self-reliance. So the most important identifier for artisanal and small-scale mining is self-reliance. And so it's done by ordinary people doing what they can do themselves, and so it's self-reliant, it's labor-intensive. That's another thing that's really important in all of this. And so it's just how people want to do it. And then as it grows in terms of volumes of mining, then we start to bring in technology, and then with the technology we start to bring in forms of management.
So with regards to that, let's just dive into some of your research. So as I understand it, from your introduction, you started out very much in Zimbabwe, so working in the chrome side of things with regards to there. And I'm sure you encountered a lot of artisanal mining whilst you were working perhaps on behalf of a large-scale mining operator. Is that correct?
It's exactly correct. And so in Zimbabwe, there were people digging chrome on the Great Dyke and making little piles near their mining operations, and then the company truck would come along and pay for it and pick it up and bring it into our smelter. And that's when I realized there was this large group of people who were digging on claims that may have been left by other companies, or they were just mining anyway. And so there was a potential for helping these people, and also a potential for accessing ore that didn't require large items of equipment. As soon as the ore gets too deep or too difficult, you bring in equipment, and that's when you need company and company money. But initially, as I was saying earlier, if it's easy accessible, ordinary people can just start digging chrome on the surface and just digging as deep as they want to go. And that's where my attention first got hooked by artisanal mining. Yeah.
And so then you went on and you've done an awful lot of research, am I right in saying predominantly in Kenya rather than Zimbabwe with regards to artisanal mining? Do you want to talk about that a little bit?
Because of my personal history in Zimbabwe, I realized that if I arrived on a artisanal mining site and said, I'm just doing research, that would not wash.
They wouldn't believe you.
Oh, no. You're here for some reason. And so I was able, fortunately, to go through the University of Nairobi and get an opportunity to go and do research on artisanal gold mining sites down on Lake Victoria. And so I then spent altogether 6 months over different periods, chunks of time, researching artisanal gold mining in the Migori County, which is right down on Lake Victoria.
And what was your thesis question that you were exploring?
What would mineral justice look like for artisanal miners?
And you concluded?
As you would always in the PhD, there's no single answer. It's very nuanced. Yeah. And so it really is a vitally important subject. But if we look at the word impact, the word impact in itself is local and specific. You know, impacts are not broad-range things. And artisanal mining is an impact. It's not always a good impact, and you can interpret it any way you like. The people see it as a positive impact because it's their livelihood. They're suddenly getting money where they didn't have money before. And they're getting money quickly where they would have to wait for a seasonal crop to grow, mature, be picked and sold. Whereas you can go mining today and get money tonight. It's as simple as that. It's like fishing. You can go and cast your net into Lake Victoria, bring out the fish, and you got paid that afternoon. It's exactly the same. And so the turnover in mining is incredibly fast. Today's work results in tonight's money, payment. And all of that goes into livelihoods and how people make their livelihoods. And so artisanal mining or microscale mining is very much driven by livelihood. People talk about it as subsistence mining or poverty-driven mining or other things, and all those words are partly true, but really it's about a livelihood. How can I earn money, particularly for my family? Over 50% of the miners in Africa in particular, sub-Saharan, are women. And any one of them, when you interview them, why are you doing this? It's for the family.
Yeah.
It's for the family.
So is that something where it's for the family immediately, or are they seeing that over the long term, so the future development of their family?
Generally immediately, though. It's all about food, it's about school fees, it's about clothing. It's all seen to be fairly short term. But of course, in the longer term, if you educate your kids properly now, then they will go on to other things. But school fees are very much a driver. I know there's a lot of child labour in this world, and the media does pick on child labour, but it's not child labour as in we don't want to go to school, we want to earn money. Their parents are normally driving them to go to school. It's just after hours or part of the family or part of the weekend that they will want to help mom and dad with the picking of rock from a dump or something. And so it is child labour, but it's not, in my experience, it's not at the expense of schooling.
Okay. And so, I mean, so that's something which might come as a surprise, perhaps, to some of the end consumers or people who are reading newspapers, etc. During your research, did you come across any other surprises or things where there's common perceptions with regards to microscale mining that you found to perhaps not be that true?
One of the great, I think, fallacies in the media is that miners are ignorant. These are ignorant people, they don't know what they're doing. And the truth is they are not. They're different, they think differently, they do things differently, but they've got it all sorted in their mind. They know what they're doing and why they're doing it and how they want to do it. And so that was a surprise to me, was to discover the self-taught, the ability to use their own hands and their own thoughts without getting a formal education in mining. But they were very practical and thought through what they wanted to do. And of course, the biggest surprise to me was the fact that the media loves to think that they don't know about the dangers of mercury. We'll come back to mercury later. But every miner I interviewed, male or female, was very aware of how dangerous mercury was, both for themselves, their families, and for the environment. So that was probably the biggest surprise, was how deeply ingrained the worry about mercury really is.
And with that, I mean, there's been a lot of attention placed on mercury with regards to gold over the years, and it's my understanding that various groups have tried to provide different forms of equipment, for example, to help provide other mechanisms so you don't need to use mercury with regards to dealing with the gold. In terms of the provision of equipment to the microscale miners, does that help or does that hinder, or there are some nuances in there?
Where organizations like the Artisanal Gold Council have built central processing plants in countries like Mali and Burkina Faso, those have been used and those are successful. But the picture there, or the method there, is that the miners must bring their ore to a central processing plant where it is then processed in a mercury-free manner. So that has worked, but it takes a lot of money. It's called the 2 kilogram model because it takes 2 kilograms worth of gold to put that together. Now, when your average miner is earning less than a gram to multiple grams a day, maximum maybe 5-10 grams a day, 2 kilograms is an awfully big jump. And so right now that model hasn't been adopted except by NGOs and governments. So governments are sponsoring mercury-free processing plants, so are certain NGOs. I've just mentioned one. But those are not being adopted by the locals as theirs. They just see it as a service, but somebody else must build it, pay for it, service it, look after it, etc. There's no sense that this is ours. It remains, this is theirs, and we're using it, thankfully.
Okay.
Yeah.
And in terms of that, the practicality that you mentioned with regards to the microscale miners and the ability to fix equipment, but also the self-sufficiency of what those miners are doing, have you got any stories with regards to that?
Some companies, gold equipment supply companies, have realized that there is an opportunity here to try and make equipment that is more appropriate for the small scale, not yet the micro scale, but to make small scale equipment that would be part of a mercury-free process. And so it is a company in Johannesburg that is leading in this, and certainly the African leader, and they've sold a number of systems, different pieces of equipment, for example, recently to the Ghanaian government, who bought 100 units of this mercury-free processing equipment, and they've taken it across to Ghana. And so that's a success story. But again, the funding is coming from some other source rather than the miners themselves. But lately, though, and I've been prevailing on this company for more than a decade, hassling them to come up with a cheaper piece of equipment. Their piece of equipment is known, they call it a gold catcher. And their gold catcher, the present standard size, costs about $6,000. And I'm saying, even that's too much. You've got to bring it down, you've got to bring it down. And so they finally, this year, in the last 2 to 3 months, they finally produced a prototype of a smaller model of their gold catcher, which they call a mini GK. And that costs about $1,000. Okay. Now we're talking, because that isn't a sum of money that scares artisanal miners. They will form a collective, or they already do, to buy things like a compressor in rock drill, to buy pumps to pump out their mines, to buy mills so that they can crush and mill their ore themselves, and so and solar panels. And so they're not afraid to spend money if they can see the immediate payback. It's got to be, they must immediately see that they're going to get money out of this. And I believe this mini GK is the perfect piece of equipment for adoption by microscale miners. And so I have bought the first item, the prototype that they've built. I've moved it up to Harare, and they are now, a team of friends of mine in Harare are now going to start testing that equipment and then taking it out to mining sites to show it to the miners themselves that this mini GK, I think, is a game changer. Yeah.
So based on your many years of experience working both from large-scale mining through to the micro-scale mining, if there was one thing that you could change right now with that, would that be to try and encourage people to use this new form of equipment, because that would take mercury out of the system?
Absolutely. I know that there's a global mercury report issued by the United Nations EP, Environment Program, every 2 years. And every 2 years, the amount of mercury is going up. In spite of things like the Minamata Convention, in spite of mercury being banned in all dentistry work and in thermometers and all sorts of things. And that's simply because of artisanal level gold mining. And the last figure I saw was that 2,000 tons of mercury have been used globally. And that has either gone into watercourses, such as Lake Victoria, which is worrying, or it's gone into the atmosphere. And so to explain that, I need to give a little bit of technical background as to why that should happen. So what happens when the miners mine, they crush the rock, and what comes out of the rock are particles of free gold. And some of them are right down to the edge of visibility for the human eye. But it's still been liberated in the crushing and milling. And that then is then put across a sluice, and that sluice then concentrates the gold particles out of the general waste rock. And that general waste rock is tossed aside, and then the gold particles are then panned. So first they're concentrated on the sluice, then they are panned. And usually in the pan, people throw mercury, free mercury, into the pan. And so while they're swirling the concentrate around in the pan underwater, the mercury is quietly amalgamating with the gold particles. And then the pan is tipped, and excess water and excess mud slurry is pushed out of the pan, until eventually what you're left with is the silvery tail of gold and mercury. That is then put into a cloth and squeezed, and the free mercury comes out through the holes in the cloth, but the amalgamed mercury stays inside the cloth and comes out as a little bead. And that bead can be as small as, believe it or not, the tip of a pencil. That's grams of gold, tenths of grams of gold, or as small as your little fingernail. And that's a bead of gold. And then that bead of gold, which is now mercury gold amalgam, is simply heated over an open fire. And then the mercury is driven off into the atmosphere. It then goes and lands on something and then becomes part of the environment, which is really worrying. And what's left then is this porous bead of gold, which is sold to a local gold dealer. The gold dealer will be there, and he's usually got the next bit of mercury.
Okay.
And so the gold dealer is both taking away the gold and supplying the mercury, as usually. And mercury is ubiquitous on every gold mining area I've ever been to. And no one knows how the mercury gets there.
Okay.
So in spite of all the great efforts to try and reduce mercury usage by gold, it is still everywhere. It's completely widespread, and there's no sign of it tailing off. And so that worries me. That's my deepest concern, is how can we stop using mercury for the sake of people's health, for the sake of and the environment.
So we now understand some of the problems associated with the mercury. There are a number of solutions on the table, but from a large-scale mining perspective, what could or should the large-scale mining world be doing to help this?
It's almost endemic around a large-scale gold mining operation that there are artisanal miners scratching in the area, and it's almost invariable that they will be using mercury. So if any large-scale operation in the area, instead of trying to ban it or prohibit mining, could find ways of helping the miners to reduce their use of mercury without condoning anything else, just please can we help you reduce mercury, that would be a major positive for the world, for our environment. Yeah.
So it sounds like there's a potential solution on the horizon. Terry, thank you so much for coming and speaking to us today. Absolutely fantastic, and good luck with this new piece of equipment. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thanks very much.
Thank you.
All right then. Okay, bye.